Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, I'd love to talk about the first topic that you've so generously offered to discuss, which is changing career paths, going back to school, and starting a tech career in your late 20s. I'd love to know more about the mindset that you had to adopt to return back to school. What were you feeling in that moment?
So many feelings. I think a lot of people, and I get a lot of DMs about that on Instagram, a lot of people that do consider going back to school at I guess, like an unorthodox time or unusual stage in your life. They always have those fears of, oh, I'll be too old or anything along those lines that you can imagine, I think people feel. And so for me, a few of the things that I had to shift my mindset on were the first of all, the age thing. I felt too old, which looking back now, I was going back to school in like mid 20s. So that feels like a baby now. I'm 30. So I'm like, what was I worried about? I was still a kid. So really thinking, okay, I may not be in the same stage of life as everyone else here, but it is my journey and it is what is going to give my journey more color and more life. Like a lot of the times now when I do interviews for tech companies, or for instance my last internship at Microsoft, a lot of the times they'll ask me about my background in fashion design, graphic design, and it's helped me a lot in things like UX UI, and also the fact that I was a student at an older age. It also created this almost like distinction of, okay, so there's more maturity here, there's more readiness to engage with others. A lot of the times when you're younger, you have those fears of, oh, I'm going to be judged, and I had all of them when I was 18, 19, 20. I was incredibly shy, which is crazy to think now that I share my life online and stuff like that. But at that age, I would not have been in the same mindset and wouldn't have had the same personality traits that I do now. And so I started reframing all of those things as, okay, I have these characteristics that make me stand out, that make me look more attractive to employers because I have more of a trajectory of discipline and of showing up to work and all these different things. And I can carry myself better than I did when I was younger. So I try to rely on those things. Okay, I may be older in this respect, but I have these things that are working for me. And so really reframing that helped me a lot. Then also kind of making peace with where I was in life. That's not where I envisioned myself at all when I was younger. And so just accepting that, okay, this is how the card was drawn and how life turned out for me. And it could be so much worse. And I'm lucky to, even in the situation that I am and this, that, the other, whatever struggles I may be going through, I still am privileged in a lot of ways to be in this position. And so leaning into that helped me a lot too.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that, especially the exercise you did in reframing your thoughts. And what I would love to do is to sort of break down those thoughts a little bit for the audience to think about some of the unhelpful thoughts that were sort of showing up in your mind and then reframing each to something more helpful. So you can pick any thought whatsoever. And I'd love to do a little quick exercise on changing that into something that did serve you more then, so that anyone listening, as they're encountering this in whatever stage of life they are, in whatever place of the application cycle they are, especially with at this time of recording 2022, the recent layoffs, I
Yeah.
think all of it is a really heavy burden to carry if people aren't in tune with themselves to do that reframing. And so I'd love to do that little exercise with you now.
Yeah, for sure. So, for instance, for me, something that I faced very early on when switching from an artistic background and just an artistic identity my whole life, I saw myself as an artist. I never really gravitated towards the sciences. And so that was ingrained in how I saw myself. And so considering a technical field and a computer science degree, to me, that went against everything that I believed about myself. And so that, for instance, was something that, oh, I'm not smart enough, quote unquote, or I'm not a person that does this. That was something that was very present in my thought process and in the way I was experiencing this change. And I think that's very common because I'll hear a lot of people saying the same thing, whether they had an artistic background or in anything else. They may not see themselves as someone who can code or someone who is good enough because they don't know math, or they're not good at math, or they hate math, stuff like that. So that was definitely one for sure.
I love that. And I'd love to know a little bit more about the beginnings of your journey to big tech, and in that identity shift and in that choice you made to select computer science when you started school again. What helped or motivated you to make that decision despite those big identity shifts that were sort of going on in the background? How did you essentially make that choice and then stick with it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, first of all, what really made me go against my own beliefs was the fact that when I was in graphic design and fashion design, and I was also doing freelance illustration in Argentina, I started working on my own blogs, my own websites, stuff like that. And so I had dabbled in HTML and CSS. And when I started, I didn't know that had anything to do with computer science, by the way. I was so disconnected from the field that I had no idea. I just thought that's where it ended, like HTML, CSS, and that's it. And so when I started learning more about this field, I leaned into that, into the interest that I had found in that, and kind of hooked onto that to just like carry me through the first bid. I was just like, okay, if I can relate it to something that I'm familiar with, that I enjoy, maybe it's not so disconnected from who I am and who I've been before. So that was one of the things. And then another thing that I always advocate for is your connections, is the people that you're interacting with. Around that time, when I first made the switch and decided to start learning how to code, that's when I found the online community. And when I first created my Instagram account, which, fun fact, was about studying originally. It was just my study notes and my handwriting because I just need to motivate myself to keep studying and focus and not worry about all those fears. And so I had started posting my notes, and I have a pretty tidy handwriting, so I was sharing that. And then in that serendipity, I discovered a lot of women that were coding or learning how to code. And so seeing that representation is something that also encouraged me. It's like, oh, I could be like them, could be just as badass and cool and making things. So that was another thing that kind of made it sort of okay to explore that for me.
Absolutely. And I see so much growth in that journey from what you've shared online on social media. And there's so many tools and resources you shared that may have been foreign to you when you started, but after you learned about it, after you used it, after you familiarized yourself with it, you were then able to make a video to talk about it and share all its benefits in your journey to big tech. And so I'm curious about which one of those resources really felt tough to grapple with in this journey, especially in that leap from having the identity shifts and having so much in the background, all of this thought work that you had to do. And then on top of that, learn all of these new challenging things, but to do it in a way that would make you a top candidate for a very interesting but challenging field to break into. So I'm curious about what felt tough in those leaps that you made with the resources. What felt tough to maybe use and get used to, And how were you essentially able to think, no, I'm really cut out for this. I can be here. What helped you see yourself in that internship or in that full-time role now?
Well, the struggle was definitely data structures and algorithms. That felt extremely foreign to me. And it was also very disconnected from the front end stuff that I used to connect my interest to tech with. So when I first started looking into that and realizing, oh, this is what they'll test me in interviews, I was like, ooh, I have no idea what this means. Like big O notation, all that stuff. I was completely lost. And so that was definitely sort of a turning point where I really needed to push myself and dive deeper to understand better all those things. Two of the things that really helped me through that were, first of all, the people that I met at school. There's a very big tech organization there, shout out UP, and there's also Women in CS. Who are very active in my school, and they create a lot of workshops to help you through interviews, to help you with all of the technical stuff, the behavioral stuff, there's networking. So really connecting with those workshops and making friends with those people helped me a lot my first year at my current school, which was 2020. So I got a couple months in person. I joined this workshop for technical interviews by women in computer science, the tech club at school. And so that started kind of getting my feet wet and getting me into what data structures were and what algorithms were and all that stuff. And then another huge resource that I've been advocating for a few years now, since I found it because I love it so much and it helped me so much in my own journey, is this nonprofit organization called CodePath. They actually have an amazing program where they offer free courses for US college students that are pursuing any sort of computer science degree, and they are trying to fill in those gaps that we have within the degrees if we don't really learn a lot about how technical interviews work. I haven't had any class like that. I would love one at school, and it's very needed, but they came in and just took me under their wing with their technical interview prep course that I took that summer of 2020. And that was a deep dive into data structures, algorithms, technical interview questions, how to solve them, the framework that you need to think about when you're trying to solve a problem like that. And so that really helped me not only learn and start to understand these things, but also see myself as someone who could do it, because they are also serving Black and Hispanic communities. So it's a very strong cohort of other people that are facing similar struggles as you or have similar backgrounds. And so it feels so much more warm and cozy in there than out in the world where you have to either do it by yourself or feel like you are not like the other people that are doing it along with you. So that was a really meaningful resource that helped me tremendously.
I love that. And that really ties into the representation that you were talking about and what a difference it makes to be in rooms with others who look similar to you. And no matter who or what they look like, at least there is that warmth that you mentioned. And I think that goes such a long way. And I'm so grateful that you shared all of those resources. I'll add that in the show notes to make sure that anyone listening can access that. And what I'd love to know about is the fact that you speak of so many powerful actions that you took, putting one foot in front of the other, enrolling in the school that you did in first, and then switching to a different school, being a part of these organizations, applying to the internships, learning about these technical interview prep courses, all of these steps you took. And as you mentioned earlier, there was so much thought work that happened behind all of this. And I'd love to get more insight on what this actually looked like for you, in the sense that were you able to essentially wake up every day and know what action to take or spend time thinking about what actions to take. I would love to know more about the systems that helped you make those actions, because for me as an international student, when I came to the US in 2016, and I did it just like everyone else, thinking through what should my next step be. A lot of it involved not having very strong systems, or the systems that I really needed. I was essentially doing what the person next to me was doing, but that wasn't really working for me. And so, what I talk about now online or even on this podcast are systems and uncovering what systems people have. So, maybe now in my working career, it looks like Notion and the Passion Planner and affirmations from a particular app, or journaling with 3 prompts, or brain dumping, or things of that sort. I'd love to talk a little bit more about really what was helping you know what to do next, and do so in a way that felt kind to your mind and your body. Because as you share all of this, there's so much wisdom behind what you're sharing, but there must have been other emotions like panic, confusion, uncertainty. And I'm curious about how you navigated that.
Yeah. So that's exactly what I was going to speak to when you asked the question, because the journey to that and the systems and the sort of the way that it panned out realistically was very messy, especially early on, just because that, like you said, there were a lot of times where I would enter into a panic and I would feel myself stuck in this situation, especially being an international student and not seeing sort of the light at the end of the tunnel and not knowing what my life would look like, if I would be able to stay in this country. All of these fears that a lot of people, if they're not going through that experience or a similar experience, they really don't understand. For instance, like not being allowed to work, like that feels like such a basic thing. But if you go through that experience, then you understand, and you understand not only that it's not just not being allowed to work, but it also involves your self-confidence, because then you feel like you are not good enough at all these things, but it's just the system is not allowing you. So it's a lot of uncovered layers that I, throughout my own journey, have had a lot of difficulty sort of explaining or sharing those emotions with someone who hasn't lived it. And I've gravitated a lot to the people that were living through it or something similar, or had lived it and came out of it. And that would give me that strength and that hope that, okay, there's something that I'm working towards here and that it's possible. And so for me, especially in the very beginning years of that change and trying to navigate what that would look like for me, it was a lot of panic and fear and a lot of crying. I vividly remember there would be times where I would just think like, is this even worth it, what I'm doing? And I would just start Googling jobs, like fashion design jobs in Europe, because I have an Italian passport. So I figured, well, if I can't be here and support myself here, then maybe I just need to leave, And so I would go into a panic, and like very early on, I applied to a lot of jobs there, and I got not even callbacks to any of them. So I was like, okay, maybe. And now looking back, I'm like, I'm glad I didn't. But at the time, it felt like, shoot, what am I doing with my life, And so really at that point where I was so deep in the struggle that I couldn't even find the systems to support me through that, at that point, it was really relying on my family, on my friends. I made really good friends at my first college, where I could just talk to them and they would, if they didn't understand, they would make the space to try to put themselves in my shoes and see like, okay, this sounds hard as hell. And they would kind of validate that and help me through that and just allow me to feel those feelings. And then over the years, I was able to find this amazing therapist that worked great for me. She was very based in mindfulness and in those kind of practices. And she was actually doing research at a university very close across the street from the one I was going to. And so that was really in the moments when I felt most stuck, was showing up to therapy and talking through those things and realizing that, okay, I may not have control over the system and the progress that I'm stuck in and the fears that I have, but I have control over how I face that and how I show up to it. So really therapy like changed my whole outlook on how I was facing that. And it was a big pillar. And then from there, I was able to pick up journaling, long form journaling. I have journals where I'm just like dumping all my feelings and really processing all of that. And now I look back on that, I'm like, wow, my life has changed completely. And I'm so glad that I have that to look back on. So it wasn't only something that served me at that time, but it serves me now to remember what I went through and where I come from. Because it's easy to forget once you kind of get out of the shit and you see the light and you're like, oh my God, this is what life can be like.
Yes, absolutely. And I think what is so interesting is from my personal journey of, going through these things that you talked about and then seeing the light on the other side, but then to actually start that job, even after rest and relaxation. For me, this year looked like a lot of still worrying about the next steps because as an international student or first gen student, sometimes you don't know maybe who the best movers are, how to get out of your dorm into this new state, how much to budget for, what does that cost, like how much to ask for a signing bonus, what is appropriate. And there's so many questions that come up that using long form journaling or even sharing these concerns out loud with a therapist can go such a long way. And I'm so grateful that you spoke on this and to share a little bit more of what I've learned coming out on the other side is that I've personally had to extend so much compassion to myself, even in the dream, like living in the full-time job, having the remote work environment I want, having the team or starting the career that I want, also comes at the cost of being just so incredibly tired from everything that I've been through. And it's like my body is saying, you just need to relax now. Like you cannot maybe, show up on social media to share these resources that you know of immediately after graduating because your cup is not full. And I think that is such a interesting piece of learning. And these resources that you've shared, again, will take me really far, will take the audience members listening far. And what I wanted to put in to the episode here is that even when you get there and if your life doesn't feel like you thought it would feel, that is absolutely okay because you did such a hard thing. Like there was so much uncertainty and confusion and you problem solved all the way through. And when you finally make it there, you might feel more battered and bruised than you thought you were because you were so focused on getting there, you didn't even know the bruises, you didn't even see them. And so I just wanted to take a moment to make space for that realization. And for example, when I envision you enter like next year, just like being so focused on being so good at your job, but also in your life outside of work, like looking fabulous, looking fashionable. I want to, in many ways, give you a heads up of if you feel some type of way where you're like, why am I so tired? Or why doesn't this feel like I thought it would feel? That is absolutely okay. And that feeling will eventually pass, but that might require those extra bits of help and support
Mm-hmm.
because we've just been working so hard to be here. Um, yeah, that's my 2 cents
I love
on
that.
the
I
journey.
appreciate that so much because as someone who's ahead of me in the journey, I see you sort of achieving the things that I was looking towards and living the life that you have been manifesting and working so hard for. And so I know that you have a lot of wisdom to speak to that. And I can totally resonate with that because that's kind of how the the first few weeks of my internship last summer were like, where it was like, this is really cool, this is amazing, but I get home and I'm exhausted and I feel just like not only like physically but mentally and emotionally just kind of depleted. And it was kind of strange because I didn't see that coming, but it makes so much sense because we've been trying to overcompensate to get through all of those struggles, that the mind needs time to recover from that, the body from any traumas and things that we've endured that we just had to push through and just not really pay attention to because it was going to break us. So we just needed to keep moving along just to get through it. So that makes so much sense. And I will be mindful of that because I love that you make that sort of disclaimer of you need to be kind to yourself. I never want my retelling of the experiences to sound too shiny and perfect because it was not at all. And there was a lot of struggle in that journey. It's been years since I first decided to switch to computer science. So it's not like I got my big tech break overnight. And now that I'm starting to get more followers, a lot of people that just meet me and see like, oh, she's at this wonderful place, they think that that happened quickly and easily, and it didn't. And so I always want to acknowledge that and let people know that it takes a lot of time and effort to overcome these struggles that you may be facing. And you shouldn't ever compare yourself to others outside. And we hear that so much, but I want to make that space now to really mention that. And in the same ways that I was saying, we need to, think about the ways in which we're privileged. Like for me, I even got the chance to come here, and a lot of people in my country don't. So a lot of these different things that we're fortunate for, it's good to acknowledge them, but you have to be very mindful of keeping the balance between acknowledging that to make yourself feel good and not judging yourself for not feeling like you're grateful for, like you're not grateful for it, so a lot of the times what would happen to me is I would judge myself. It's like, oh, I have all of these things going for me that other people don't. Why am I complaining about this, or why am I feeling bad about this? So when you do that, you're invalidating all of your own feelings, and then it creates this friction that makes you feel awful. Something that my amazing therapist taught me was rewriting those sentences we tell ourselves. Instead of saying like, oh, I'm going through this, but I should feel this other way, it's I'm going through this and there's this other thing. And so it's not this duality of I either feel good about what's happening or I feel bad and then I'm a terrible person because I'm not grateful for what I have. It's just creating that rewriting of the but and replacing it with and acknowledging all sides of it.
Absolutely. And I think that is such an important tool and skill that I hope people can take a minute to even pause the episode and just think through things that they've been telling themselves that have those buts in them and how to change that to an and. I think that's really important here. And so
Yeah.
I'd love to discuss more on the journey of being an international student and immigrant to the country and being on a visa and the particular challenges that you faced, because what I've learned through this journey is that every student has a unique experience. Even if they're on an F1 visa, there isn't really a catch-all because every person might be from a different country. They might have different interests. They might be passionate about different niches in the industry that they're in. And so if someone is passionate about one particular area of computer science and is from one particular country, they might have a really different experience to someone else from a different country going towards this different area. And so I'd love to know more about the specific challenges that you faced, and I'd love to know about how you navigated the stress that it created.
Well, first, I think it's really valuable that you acknowledge that different F1 students have different experiences, because that's one of the things that I always put in my privilege pile is, okay, I may be here on a visa, but I have family here. I have people that I can rely on for support. I would not have been able to take on this whole thing financially if I hadn't been able to have that support, because one of the things that comes with that visa is you can't work outside of school for more than part-time. And so school doesn't pay a lot. So that immediately leaves you outside of being able to support yourself alone. So I needed that support to get through that. And that's something that I find extremely valuable in my experience of having had. And it's an advantage that a lot of people don't have. And I've met a lot of students that come here, leave their whole family, community, country, and I believe you've been one of them, where you come here and you start from scratch trying to figure out this completely different system. And I want to acknowledge you and everyone who's going through that or has gone through that, because that is something that honestly I don't know if I would have been able to be where I am right now if I had been in that circumstance. And so I really value the struggles that must have brought up for you, and for anyone going through that. My heart goes out to anyone that's in that, because it really creates this isolation where you're far from home, you're far from the people that know you and love you, and you have this huge task of getting through the situation, succeeding at the end of it, but then also finding people here that will support you in the ways that you need. And that's hard. That's very hard. So that's always something that I want to acknowledge in my journey too, because I don't want people to compare themselves to my journey thinking that I didn't have that, and that makes a huge difference, I think. So that was one of the things that helped me. One of the things that helped me too was also that in computer science, when, for instance, if you're just going to software engineering, nothing fancy, no bells and whistles, it's easier to find internships and jobs that will sponsor you, as opposed to something, for instance, like space, where there's a lot of government contracts and they require residents or citizens. And so I also want to acknowledge you for that, because that is extremely difficult to navigate as well. And finding all these opportunities where you feel like you can't, not based on your hard work, you're married, or because you didn't work enough. It's just intrinsically a fact of the system and how things work here. And so navigating that, I can only imagine, is very difficult. For me, it was easier. I'm sorry, my dog is barking.
You're totally fine.
So it's distracting me a little. You probably saw a squirrel. But yeah, so for me, it was really good to keep those things in perspective as well, and look at the things that I had control over. So for instance, looking at bigger tech companies because they just had the resources to sponsor. Eventually, I didn't need the sponsorship because my family was able to petition me. It just took ages, because that's just how things work. And like a month or two before, I was able to get a work permit. So I was not needing to get any sponsorship, but it's good to look for those because they offer that. And I forgot what the rest of the question was.
Yes, the rest of the question was just the unique challenges that you faced in the journey prior to getting the petition for that change in visa. Because as you acknowledged, there is this spectrum that you've noticed, just the differences amongst industries. But was there anything particularly tough about your situation that really brought about a ton of stress? And then essentially, how did you navigate that stress? And I think you really touched on this with mentioning that it's important to keep perspective so that you know where you are realistically on that spectrum, particularly being a computer science student who has theoretically opportunities around the world. So once you're in a big tech company, if there's anything that happens with the visa or the sponsorship, there's so many places of work with the same nature of compensation truly around the world. Keeping that in perspective is really important. And I think that brings to mind the introspection aspect as well, and getting super real with where you are in all of this and the chaos and the mess that it feels. And something else that I wanted to speak to that came up for me as you were talking about my journey and having to work towards something that I knew could essentially reject me, not because of merit or competence, but just because of how the system is recognizing this really interesting thing where when you come to a different country alone, by yourself, without family, you are seeking community that maybe is from a similar place to you, maybe people who look similar to you. And something I realized was that no two people are the same. And so you might learn how to get an on-campus job from someone who comes from your country or has a similar background to you, but they might be in a different major to you. So you get this on-campus job and you're thinking, okay, this friend is a really good friend, we're going to help each other, etc. But if you don't have that insight into your uniqueness or the different ways in which you show up intersectionally, then you don't realize that you need to have different people and this whole varied community to address and support all the different aspects of your identity. And that is something that took me, I want to say, about 3 years to fully understand, because I kept attaching myself to people in the community who I thought would be of support, but there were certain fundamental differences. So maybe they were in the dance community I was in, and so I could talk to them about time management, but they were a different major, and so time management looked different, and so their advice wasn't as applicable to me. And so I began to realize how critical it was to have my own way of solving things, and that I couldn't necessarily mirror someone else's advice because we just weren't the same. And I saw so many people in these groups, such as SWE or SHAP, so the Society of Women's Engineers, or the similar group for the Hispanic engineers. Like, these big groups have these systems of support where they could essentially pass down their knowledge from one person to the other. And I saw these groups essentially not being able to support my situation because of those unique restrictions in aerospace, or being from Singapore, or being on a dance team. And so that's also where that introspection is so important, so you can understand who you are to even know what kind of help you need.
Yeah. Wow. And I find that so insightful because I had never conceptualized it in that way. But I'm hearing you and thinking back, and I'm like, oh yeah, this person and that person, like I gravitated towards them, but our situations weren't the same. So it completely tracks. I can vouch for that for sure. But
Yes.
I
And oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, so essentially, when you gravitate towards this person who you think can really help you, and your situations are totally different, and they happen to be in a comparative advantage, it is so challenging not to compare yourself
Mm-hmm.
because that advantage is so fully in your face,
Yeah.
and they might be a really close friend of yours. They might not mean any harm, but it's just so hard to not compare yourself. And I think in my journey and also what I'm hearing of yours, it is to position yourself in a way where you essentially begin to distance yourself from those conversations, where
Mm-hmm.
if you sense that comparison coming up for you, you find ways to essentially not be in those conversations or
Mm-hmm.
situations for your own sanity,
Yeah.
so that you can get the help you need, but also take care of your well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for me, that was something very present that I had to either consciously or subconsciously do, because my thing at the time was I was seeing all of the people around me move on with their lives. They were moving ahead, they were starting lives, they were getting apartments, they were getting cars, and I couldn't do any of that. And so for me, it was focusing more on myself, on the things that I had control over. So I was sewing more, I was drawing more, I was just putting my time into things that would get me out of those thoughts and those conversations with myself, and more into the present moment, or the things that would ground me and would let me know like I'm having my own experience, and whatever experience they're having has nothing to do with me. It's none of my business. I need to mind my own business and find what works for me. And so also learning, like you said, how to understand yourself and know yourself and what you need and what you don't need, so that when you do encounter people that may be able to help you or may not, you can take whatever you need and discard whatever advice or like modeling that you may have done looking at their journey, and say like, well, that doesn't work for me because of XYZ, my visa, my whatever. Then let's set that aside and just keep moving, instead of dwelling on, oh, but for me, I'm not able to take advantage of this situation, which is a lot of what I was facing originally. It was like this self-pity of, oh, I can't do this, that, or the other because of the situation, focusing more on what I can do and moving forward with my own life.
Absolutely. And you've touched on this with all of your responses so far, but I'd love to know more about what you wish you could tell little Anto now, based on what you know, and what you wish she knew about the process or journey.
I would tell her that she belongs more than she realizes, and that what she thinks are her weaknesses or time wasted, quote unquote, in other journeys, in other interests, before changing, they're actually very strong assets that will make her stand out and make her stronger in other areas. She may not end up being super strong technically right away, but that's something that can be worked on. But that every experience that she has lived has brought her to where she's meant to be. And everything that has felt very hard and felt like it shouldn't have happened because it was bad is a lesson that has made her stronger and will continue to do so.
I absolutely love that. Thank you so much. And that is such valuable advice for anyone listening. And I'd love to talk about our third topic, which is rising with your community and creating success for yourself while lifting others with that rising tide. And I'd love to touch upon this challenge that I'm facing now personally. And I'd love to know about how you were able to essentially manage your time, but also your energy as a student, a creator, and a human on this visa, because with the many stresses and challenges that essentially arise from standing firmly in your authenticity, what has helped you continue to share your journey? Because what I've realized from mine in all of the stresses and challenges is that the fatigue is really washing over me. This is a season of being tired and leaning into those activities, like you said, of sewing and this and that to fill my own cup. I'm curious about what has helped you in the past and is continuing to help you to fill your cup so that you can continue to help others, because I'm personally struggling with that.
Yeah, I'm personally struggling with that. I think it's a constant struggle. We find balance and then we fall off and then we need to find balance again. For me, the first things that I had to do when I switched and when I started creating content more consistently and started seeing all of these very overwhelming things coming on of tasks and due dates and all these different things was first of all, being honest with myself and trying to be more realistic of the things I take on. Because before I was also drawing, I kind of stopped that a few years ago. And I hope to pick it up back again when I have a job and not like 5 jobs in school, because it feels like every class is, is either a part-time job or a full-time job. So I'm hoping that time will help me with that. But really being realistic, like, okay, I do not have the time and the bandwidth right now to put into drawing or into sewing. So these are compromises that I need to make in order to be able to make time for either self-care or for school or content, and really looking at all of the buckets that I have that I want to put energy into and being honest with myself of whether I have the bandwidth and the time to do that. Because as people always say, like, we all have the same 24 hours in a day and it's like the choices you make. But we're a lot of the times very compelled to make rash choices on when something gets asked of us, or when we get the urge of, oh, I would love to create this app and stuff like that. And I say, okay, I'll do it. But then you realize that you didn't think about the other buckets that you still have to respond to, like classes and work and family and relationships and yourself. So really sitting down, writing out all of the priorities that you have and where you want your time to go to, and being realistic in the sense that, okay, I'll have to let some things go for a certain time, but also understanding that it's just a season. And that's something that helped me a lot, for instance, with the comparison with content. A lot of people that I see online are on it. And I love that. It's so inspiring. Like, they'll be posting consistently and they'll be giving a lot of value. But in the stage that I am in my life right now, that as much as I would love to be on that grind, it's just not possible, because my priorities right now are graduating, getting a full-time job, starting off strong with that full-time job, my family, since I'll be moving away soon. So it's just being honest with myself and also accepting my choices. Once I do choose, like, okay, I'm going to put more time into school than family, or more time into work than content, then sticking to that and not dwelling on the fact that, oh, this other person is creating this awesome content online, or they're going on vacations or stuff like that. It's just, okay, remind yourself that this is the bargain that you did with yourself, so that later on when your season changes, you can reassess and put that time into a different bucket.
Absolutely. And what I'd love to add that I've learned from this is that a season might even take longer to change than you think. And that is what I'm learning now, where even if I thought, okay, as soon as I shift into this whole new energy or place or location, things will change again, or I will suddenly have more time. It's very interesting to see how that time has still been filled up, or just how much rest I've been needing.
Mm-hmm.
And that is so interesting to me. And I'm so grateful that you have been so open and honest about what that feels like when you see people sort of on that grind and being able to create such beautiful work. Because my next question for you is just saying how beautiful your content is, because not only do I love how it's filmed, like the quality of it, but also the different fonts. It looks like something that is being produced so well. And so I'd love to know more about the specifics of the camera you're using, whether it's simply iPhone or some other tool, whether you've found one editing tool to be stronger than the next, and just your fonts. They're so unique and beautiful to me. I would love to know more about your use of them and how you found the type you like to use, because
Mm-hmm.
everything when you post just looks so beautiful to me.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I have to thank for that my background in graphic design. And that's another thing that I used to feel like was against me. It's like, oh, I wasted all this time on this other career. And then I'm seeing it come through for me in other ways. So it's always good to remind yourself of the things that you've done before can come back and support you in other ways. As far as filming, most of my reels and stuff I do on my iPhone. I have the 13. Um, and then I also have the Sony, I think it was CV, is it? Let me see, because I have a protector on it. I can't remember, but it's on my CV1. Yeah. So this one, I think it's like the classic vlogger one. I got it last year, and it's been helpful because my storage goes insane on my phone. So I had to kind of pull away from recording on my phone. Um, and then as far as fonts and graphics and stuff like that, what I tend to do every now and then is sort of an audit of my visual presence. So I'll go on Figma or any design platform. I love Figma because it's free and you can just have it on a web-based platform. You don't have to download anything. And I just start brainstorming like, okay, what do I want my image to be like? Like, what do I want my fonts to be? What do I want to project? So it can be playful or it can be more studious. And so you'll go with like a serif font if you want to be like more polished and look a little fancy and classy, or if you want to look fun and sort of like college style, you can do bubbly fonts, stuff like that. So really thinking about that as my own personal perspective and what I want to bring visually to the world. And because it's easy to get caught up in like, oh, these other people are looking this way, so I have to use this specific font because I love how it looks for them. But then if you do that audit for yourself, then when you come across stuff like that, you don't get so swayed, because you're like, okay, it doesn't really match with what I decided my look would be. And so it also makes it look a little more cohesive. Then for fonts, I have this website that I love. It's called Creative Market, and every week they release free stuff. So every week I'm looking at, okay, let me see what they have free this week, and if I see something I like, I'll just download it and then keep it in my records, and then go back to it when I'm designing and see like, okay, maybe this matches with my aesthetic. It doesn't, stuff like that. So that's been pretty much the process lately. And once you set up that process, then it's easy to just create content a little more consistently and cohesively, because you just go to your font, go to your look, your system, and it's more organized.
I love that. And thank you so much for sharing it, especially from the lens that you have from your previous world and previous career. I think that is such meaningful advice. And more broadly, I just wanted to thank you for being on. And I'm curious if you had anything else to share across any of the other topics, if you just had like anything missing that you wanted to add in.
No pressure. I probably do, but I tend to forget things very easily. I just want to thank you for having me, and I love the conversation that we've had. I hope it can bring some comfort and support to anyone that's going through any of those situations or anything else.
I love that. Well, thank you so, so much for being on.
Thank you.